on the Farm, held here at the Heart of Junction Church in downtown Grand Junction, Colorado. And we are going to be talking tonight about the flood in the days of Noah. So let us have a word of prayer, and then we'll jump right in. God, we just want to ask that you would please meet us here. And we want to thank you for the opportunity to come together just on a Thursday night, meet at a church, and talk about the Bible. I'm grateful that we still have the opportunity to do that. And God, I want to ask that you would please use tonight and the lesson that we're going to teach to encourage folks. I pray you would give us all a strong desire to read our Bible. Please help us to have a desire to want to study the Bible and to make studying the Bible our hobby. And God, we do love you greatly. We pray you would never give up on us, but help us to be a little bit more like you. And Lord, it's always so encouraging to show up here and have folks show up to want to hear the Word of God. And we're grateful for the folks that get to watch us online who are out of town. And Lord, please just teach us, give us a soft heart, and help us tonight. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right. So tonight we are going to be talking about Noah and the flood and the Ice Age. And there's a lot of information. Enough information tonight where I kind of feel like we probably should have made this, a longer evening or maybe broke it up into two. But instead, I'm just going to talk really, really fast and see if we can cram it all in. So we'll see how this goes. So where are we going to start? Okay, if you climb to the top of the highest mountain on Earth, Mount Everest, and you stick your shovel down in the dirt, you are going to pull up a shovel full of mollusks and clamshells. The top third of Mount Everest is limestone. Here, 2 miles above sea level, you find giant fossilized oysters. You find these things all around the world. Here in the Andes Mountains in Peru. Now, these oysters and clams, they're 2 feet wide. I mean, they are massive. And one thing I know about clams, and I don't know much, clams cannot climb mountains very well. So that leads me to believe that those mountains were covered by water at some point in the past. Now, here are shark's teeth. Now, I usually have a little bag of shark's teeth. I forgot to bring them tonight. But the shark's teeth I wanted to show you were given to me by a friend who found them in the middle of the desert in Saudi Arabia. His dad was, I think, in the Air Force, and he was stationed over there for a bit. And as a child, he found shark's teeth in the Saudi Arabian desert. Now, once again, one thing I know about sharks is that they don't travel across the desert too well. So I think the whole world was covered by water at one point. Now this is an Ammonite. And I have a picture right there of an Ammonite. These guys, this is a real Ammonite fossil. This guy was supposed to live about 65 million years ago, way back when the dinosaurs were here. And this one was found in the Luss Hills in Sioux City, Iowa. Now, Sioux City, Iowa is a long way from the ocean, and Ammonites don't walk across the land too well. And even here in the Grand Valley, you can go up 10 minutes from here into Rabbit Valley, and you can find seashells. Anyone ever go up and do that? Find seashells up there? They're all over the place. Now, there is no debate. The entire world was covered by the ocean at one point. The only debate is how and when. We find clams fossilized in the closed position. Here, I have one of these. Again, this is a real fossil, and you can come on up and look at these and handle them when we're done. And this clam is fossilized in the closed position. This means that the clam must have been buried rapidly. You see, as soon as a clam dies, their shell opens up. They get torn apart and the pieces get scattered. Now, you can go to a beach and find seashells anywhere, but you never find a matching pair. There are even fossil clam beds that are 10 and 20 feet thick, all buried together very rapidly. Even fragile items like eggs can be fossilized. Here we have fossilized jellyfish. Here is a fossil of a fish while it's eating a smaller fish. Fossilization, the process, happens very, very quickly. These animals are being buried instantly. That only happens during a catastrophe. Now, what about the Ice Age? Where does that fit into the Bible? We know there was one, and we'll get there. And then what about the Grand Canyon? Doesn't the Grand Canyon take millions and millions of years to form? Well, we're going to find all of these answers in the first book of the Bible, in Genesis, chapters 6 through 11. But before we get into the story of Noah, I'd like to tell everyone exactly what I believe about the Bible. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 16 and 17 best sum up my beliefs about the Bible. We read, "All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works." Now, I believe that the Bible was written by God, and I take the book very literally. And when God said that about 4,400 years ago there was a worldwide flood in which everything died except Noah and his wife and their 3 kids and their 3 wives, I believe it. I believe it happened just like that. Now, here is the biblical timeline. And on this timeline, we start about 6,000 years ago with a supernatural creation of God that took 6 days, just like the Bible said. About 4,400 years ago, there was a flood in the days of Noah. Now, we read more about this event as we go through the Bible, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. Now, when we usually hear about Noah and the flood, most times we hear about it when we're a child and we're in Sunday school class, and you usually have cute little pictures like this. And you often see them in a church nursery, right? Because they're animals, and kids like animals. But they give a really warm, happy view of an event that is not supposed to be cute. It was the single most destructive and catastrophic event in the Bible up until our time. Only the Lord's return during the second coming will surpass the flood in terms of the number of deaths and total destruction. So, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the account of Noah found in Genesis chapters 6 through 9. And we're not going to read every word of it. We're going to hit the highlights and hopefully point out some stuff that might be new that maybe you haven't noticed in the past. And okay, so let's jump in. Why did God destroy the world? To fully understand this, I recommend that you watch our video that we have up online called Aliens, UFOs, and the Bible, Part 2. You can find that on our Facebook page under the video section. Now, the short answer to the question is, why did God destroy the world? Well, sin, okay? Absolutely. We just highlight the specific sin and explain what God is talking about in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, when we're talking about the giants and those things. If you haven't approached that subject yet, I recommend you do it. It'll help you get a more full understanding of the whole Bible. In Genesis 6:5, we read, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." Then in verse 12, "And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created, from off the face of the earth." Now, people often get upset when God participates in worldwide genocide. And I understand that. What God is doing here is pulling the weeds to protect the flowers. Now, many of us have gardens. Some of us grow fruits and vegetables. Others just like flowers, but lots of people grow things. And we all pull the weeds. But we don't pull the weeds because we hate the weeds. We pull the weeds because we love the flowers. I know that the weeds will only choke out and kill the flowers. and I want to protect the flowers, so I have to pull the weeds. Now, here is what God says about the wicked who die. God says, "Say unto them, as I live, saith the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn ye from your evil ways, for why will ye die, O house of Israel?" See, God doesn't want them to die. His desire is for everyone to turn from their sinful ways to him for salvation. Unfortunately, it is the minority who voluntarily submit themselves to God and receive salvation. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. So why was Noah spared? Because he walked with God. In 2 Peter 2, Peter says that Noah was a preacher of righteousness. Now remember, Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came upon the earth. He was preaching God's message for a long, long time. Even after he began construction on the ark, people had 100 years to repent and get on the ark. It wasn't that they didn't have a chance. They had no desire to do that. Verse 14, God commanded Noah, "Make thee an ark of gopher wood, rooms thou shalt make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch." Now remember, it wasn't just Noah and his 3 sons that were building the ark. I'm sure there were men who needed jobs back then just like there are today, and they probably hired a lot of help. In verse 15, "And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. Okay, so these are the dimensions of the ark. Does that help you? Oh, yeah, not really, right? What's a cubit? So, that is a cubit. Everyone hold up your cubit. You got 2 of them. You only got to hold up 1, okay? A cubit is from your fingertips to your elbow. The generally accepted length of a cubit is 18 inches, 1.5 feet. Now, since we're on the subject here, I put up a picture of a span and a handbreadth. Those are 2 other measurements that you'll read about in the Bible. So a span is from your pinky to your thumb, and a handbreadth is the width of your hand. Good things to know. So, this guy has a longer cubit than I do. This is a drawing of an 11-foot, 6-inch tall man found in an Italian coal mine. So we know there were giants on the earth in those days, so we know that a cubit might have been bigger, because a cubit is relative to the person who is measuring. So there's always a chance that the sons of Noah were a little bit bigger than we thought. But going off of the standard Egyptian cubit, that would make the ark 450 feet long. And it is there in the picture relative to the Titanic to give you an idea of the size of it. Now, I found this next part to be really interesting. What you are looking at here is a cross-section of the ark. It's 30 cubits tall, which is 45 feet, by 50 cubits wide, which is 75 feet. And this is the cross-section. So if you imagine, it's like you're in the water behind the ark as it is floating away from you. Okay, so remember, it's 450 feet long, but you're looking at the cross-section. So the dimensions make for an amazing design. Shipbuilders have actually studied the ark. The ark has a 22.5-foot draft. Anyone in the Navy that knows what that means? Okay, so the draft is the distance between the water line to the bottom of the hull. So that's 22.5 feet. The boat is down in the water. Its weight is concentrated in its center of gravity, which would be in the middle. It has weight going down and a buoyancy going up that is equal. That is why it sits in the water in the place that it does. But here's what's interesting about the ark. What happens if the ark were to tip over on its side from wind or waves? Gravity is pulling down through its center of gravity, but the water that is displaced is pushing up at it through buoyancy. The center of the buoyancy is in the center of the centroid of the triangle. So if you tip the ark over about 30 degrees, the centroid of the triangle is offset from the center of gravity. So what will be the result every time the ark tips? The buoyancy pushes back up and it rights itself. So with this particular design, so long as the center of buoyancy is above the center of gravity, it will right itself. This design means the ark could stand up almost at 90 degrees and it would right itself. It has incredibly stable proportions. It would not roll over. I think it's no surprise that God knew what he was doing when he was designing a ship. Okay, time for a quick quiz. You ready? I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to holler out the answer as loud and as fast as you can, okay? Let's see who got this. How many of each animal did Moses bring on the ark? Okay, no. The answer is none. Moses didn't bring any animals on the ark. Noah did. Okay, so yes, Noah brought 2 of most of the animals on the ark and 7 of others. Okay, we read in verse 19, and of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female. Okay, so Noah was to bring, whoop, we just skipped over like 10 slides there. Let's get back to, okay, I think that's it. So Noah was to bring 2 of every type. And last week we talked about that. What type of animal did that include? Go ahead. Go ahead, Levi. The dinosaurs. Very good. It included the dinosaurs. Okay, now the Bible gives more specifics. Noah was supposed to take 2 of every land-dwelling, air-breathing animal. So that means Noah did not have to take any fish. There's plenty of water for them. He also didn't have to bring any insects on board. Insects do not breathe oxygen. They don't have lungs. They absorb oxygen through little holes in their skin called sphericals. Okay, so remember, Noah didn't have to go out and herd up these animals like a cowboy on a horse. The Bible says, 2 of every sort shall come unto thee to keep them alive. The animals were brought, and the plain reading of the text suggests that they were brought supernaturally. Okay, then the day finally came in Genesis chapter 7, verse 1, and the Lord said unto Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark. Okay, so if God said, come into the ark, then where was God? He was in the ark. He said, come into the ark. He didn't say go into the ark. If he said go into the ark, then he was standing outside of the ark. God was in the ark with Noah and his family. They did not go through the flood alone. God was there with them. Okay, and all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Now, this is something else people have trouble with. Most of the water did not come down from the sky in the form of rain. The majority of the water came from underneath the surface of the earth. And we talked about that last week, what the original creation was like in the Garden of Eden prior to the days of the flood. And the rain was on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. It did rain, but it only rained 40 days and 40 nights. Now, Noah and his family were in the ark for 1 calendar year. But it only rained the first 40 days and 40 nights. That doesn't mean it didn't rain at all besides that. I'm sure there was some weather, but it rained straight for 40 days and 40 nights. Those numbers are specific biblically. We went over that when we went over the book of Genesis. I'm not going to, go back over all that, but 40 days and 40 nights should stand out to you. Okay, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. So don't believe anyone who tries to tell you that this flood was a local flood and it just happened in one little area. Okay, the Bible says that 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. Okay, if the mountains were covered, that means it was a worldwide flood. Okay, it was a worldwide event. And we know that, again, because God tells us, and every living substance was destroyed, both man and cattle and the creeping things and the fowl of the heaven. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. The ugliest part about the flood is the number of people who died. At the time of the flood, there were easily millions of people on earth. There could have been over 1 billion people on earth. If you don't believe me, you have not done the math. You can do it yourself. Human population statistics and a growth calculator can show you very easily that you could have millions and millions of people. You could have 1 billion people without really stretching your imagination. Okay, and then God remembered Noah. So the fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. After the rain stopped, they just floated. There was nowhere to go. They didn't have a motor or a sail or oars. Okay, they didn't have a destination. The whole world was covered with water. For a couple hundred days, they just floated and they waited. And the waters returned off of the earth continually, and after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. So the waters continued to recede until dry land appeared. Then the ark came to rest on, and we'll get there, the mountains of Ararat. And God gave Noah and the gang some new rules. In Genesis chapter 9, verse 2, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. And every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. So God changed the diet of man and beast. He also, if you read this portion in the beginning of chapter 9, he also set up civil government. And God also instituted capital punishment, the death penalty, to be carried out by mankind and civil government. Okay, and that is the brief story of Noah and the flood. So now let's look at the most common problems that come up concerning the account of the flood in the days of Noah. Number one is the construction of the ark. People have argued that a wooden ship over 300 feet in length would bend and break going over the waves. So one solution to this would have been a moon pool. This would have been a large cylindrical chamber running the height of the ship that was only open on the top and the bottom. This would provide a stress relief for long wooden ships. There's other reasons for this. If you study shipbuilding, you'll run into these throughout the history of the world. The second great problem was brought up was space. How are you going to fit all of these different animals? There are so many animals. After all, Noah had to bring 2 of all flesh. Now, today, there are 260 varieties of monkeys in the world. Did Noah have to bring 2 of each of those? No, he did not. He had to bring 2 of the monkey kind. After the flood, the monkeys would breed and make a great variety of monkeys over the years, just like people did. Okay, there were only 8 people on the ark, and from those 8 people, we get all the different ethnicities that we have today. And that is not a problem with genetics. It's another topic. We're not going to get off on the rabbit trail, but it could easily be done. So the point is, Noah took 2 of the monkey kind, 2 of the dog kind, 2 of the large cat kind, 2 of the, pick whatever you want kind. And that's what he brought on the ark. And those animals contained in their DNA enough genetic information and variety to make the great variety of the animals that we have today. So, additionally, Noah would have brought babies on the ark. There is no reason to bring 2 of the biggest elephants when you could bring babies. That leads us right into waste management. How do you deal with all of that? Well, one more reason to bring babies. They make less waste. It seems like they do it every 5 minutes, but it is still considerably less. So every farmer could tell you there are creative ideas for dealing with this. Anyone that owns any kind of animal has to deal with this at some point. But in the end, all the refuse would be thrown into the ocean via the moon pool again. One of the other big problems that they bring up is the food and water supply. Okay, I thought this would be obvious. There was plenty of water. See, people make the assumption that the oceans were salty. That is not necessarily so. The salt content in all the oceans today increases every year. Well, that means if you go backwards, there was less salt in them. It gets back to a point where there was no salt in the oceans. Okay, and I believe that was at the time of Noah. There wasn't a problem. They could have easily scooped up or pumped up as much water as they needed. So the real problem with the food and water situation is that people think that all the grazing animals needed to eat hay. Okay, and hay and straw take up a lot of space, so the problem is, where do you keep it all? But that assumes all the grazing animals were eating hay. Horses have been, I missed one, there it is. Horses have been switched to an all oats diet for periods of 22 months. In Genesis 24:32, we read, "And the man came into the house, and he ungirded his camels, and gave straw and provender for the camels, and water to wash his feet, and the man's feet that were with him." Provender is grain. Also, dried fish diets have served as the sole food source for much of the year for cattle, sheep, and horses. And I'm sure we can all agree there were plenty of fish. So there are solutions to these issues that people bring up where they think, oh, we got it. We know Noah and the flood must have been a story. There's no way it could have happened. Yes, it could have happened. It wasn't an issue. There are solutions. Okay, another one that people bring up is inadequate ventilation. The reason they bring this up is the Bible says, a window thou shalt make to the ark, and in a cubit thou shalt finish it above. So some people scoff and they say, you know, one window 18 inches square is not enough to provide adequate ventilation for the ark. There was an 18-inch tall window, but it ran the entire length of the ark. It would have been about 1,000 feet long running around the perimeter of the entire ark. And the other thing that I think is neat is that moon pool, every time you would go over a wave, that moon pool would drop down in water, then you'd come back down, it would fill up in water, and what was that doing to the air in the ark? It was pushing it out the window, sucking it back in. They had constant fresh air ventilation simply by constructing the ark properly. And if you built the ark correctly and made all of the hallways like one big run of ductwork, you could have aired out every square inch of the ark every time you went over a wave. It would have been neat to build. I would have liked to have tried to design that. I think that was pretty slick. Okay, I lost where I am with my notes. Okay, Noah could have even had animals powering fans. Okay, he could have had the animals tied up and walking around. That would have given the animals exercise. You could have also made animal-powered pumps to pump water in for drinking. Okay, none of these things are difficult to imagine. Okay, all right, here's the big question. Where's the ark today? Everyone wants to know where the ark is. We read, and the ark rested in the mountains of Ararat. And the ark rested in the 7th month upon the mountains of Ararat. Notice it says mountains. Okay, I circled the S there. It doesn't say it is on Mount Ararat. It says that it is in that mountain range. There are 4 theories currently for where the ark might be. Number 1, it was dismantled and the lumber was used for building, and that's a possibility. It may be gone, because we're going to get to this later, but when they got off the boat, what did the surface of the earth look like? The surface of the earth was under the water for a calendar year. It looked like the moon. There weren't trees and bushes and, things ready for them to use and cut down for timber, so it would make sense that maybe they used it for the ark. Number 2, it could have decomposed, it rotted, and it's gone. That's it. We're not going to find the ark. Number 3, it is still on the mountains, and number 4, it could be in the valley. But remember, it is not necessarily on Ararat. It is in The mountains of Ararat, as we said before, that is a mountain range in northeastern Turkey called the Armenian Highlands, made up of more than a half a dozen mountains over 10,000 feet in elevation. Mount Ararat is the tallest peak in that range. They have used satellites to try to search for the Ark. Haven't had a whole lot of success with that. Here is one of many first-hand accounts. It's a little lengthy, but I'm going to read it for you. In July of 1943, Ed Davies, a sergeant in the U.S. Army stationed in Iran, became friends with some local tribesmen who were related to the Kurds. They told him about Noah's Ark. They brought him to their village and showed him several artifacts from the Ark: a cage door, latches, metal hammer, dried beans, a shepherd's staff, oil lamps, bowls, pottery, jars, still containing honey. The tribal leader, Abbas, and his 7 sons took Davies on a 3-day climbing expedition onto the northeast side of Mount Ararat. Poor weather and climbing conditions kept them from getting closer than a half mile. From the Ark, 2 broken portions of the Ark lying half a mile apart on their sides were visible during the moments when the fog and clouds lifted. Wooden beams, 3 decks, and rooms were seen. During 1985 and 86, Davies successfully underwent several sessions of extensive face-to-face questioning by several dozen Ark researchers, and in 1989 passed a polygraph test. In 1970, Alfred Lee also drew a picture of the Ark in the presence of another claimed eyewitness, George Hagopian. Because both Hagopian and Davies were present as Lee made each drawing, they requested many on-the-spot changes. As Lee was completing Davies' drawing, he suddenly realized each man was describing the same object, and this, Lee said, made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. This is one of many accounts of people who say they have seen the Ark. There is no great photographic evidence of this yet. I'd be excited if anyone ever saw that. Please share it with me. The Turkish government, on the other hand, believes they have found it. Here is this map. On it says Noah's Big Boat. And here is a sign that the Turkish government posted showing you the way to get to it. So in 1959, a Turkish army captain came across the formation pictured on the left. Dr. Brandenberger, a photogrammetry expert from Ohio State University, looked into it. Brandenberger was involved in discovering the Cuban missile bases and aerial photos during the Kennedy era. He stated, "I have no doubt at all that this object is a ship. In my entire career, I have never seen an object like this on a stereo photo." After an earthquake in 1978, the structure becomes more clear. Here's a picture of it. Here is another picture of it. I don't know how clear those are, but don't worry, we'll get better ones. They believe the Ark has split down the middle as it is decomposed and the Ark's kind of, fallen apart. They used radar scans to help map the area, and they believe that they have found wooden beams and deck joists from the construction of the Ark. What they have definitely found are metal rivets and fossilized rivets. They mapped them out on the ground. You can go to Ron Wyatt's museum in Tennessee and see them there. You might be convinced this is the Ark, you might not be convinced that this is the Ark, but the Turkish government certainly is. They built a visitor center there and made it a national park. So some creationists don't like Ron Wyatt and some of his conclusions. They don't think it's the Ark. I don't know if it is. I've never been to Eastern Turkey. I am never going to Eastern Turkey. But as always, I suggest you do your own homework and come up with your own conclusions. We read in this fashion, which thou shalt make of it, the length of the Ark shall be 300 cubits. So it's 300 cubits long. Cubit is 1.5 feet, right? So the Bible measurement puts the length of the Ark at 450 feet. Because remember, a cubit is 18 inches, and the Ark is 300 of those, which totals 450. The problem with the Ark in Turkey that Ron Wyatt claims is Noah's Ark is that it is 515 feet long. So it's off by quite a bit. Okay, so You see, the 18-inch long cubit is called the standard Egyptian cubit, and that was standard at the time of Moses, which was a long time after the flood in the days of Noah. There is also something called the Royal Egyptian cubit. That is a standard Egyptian cubit plus the width of the palm of the hand of the pharaoh or the king who is ruling at the time. Although the standard Egyptian cubit is 18 inches, the Royal Egyptian cubit is 20.6 inches. And if you multiply 20.6 times the 300 cubits long that it's supposed to be, then you get exactly 515 feet for the length of the ark. Now that doesn't prove that it is the ark, but I'm just saying don't count it out because it's a little longer than what they were expecting. Okay, now they also found these giant stones with holes drilled in the top of them. Here is Ron Wyatt and his team standing next to one of those stones. They found these in eastern Turkey with the rivets and all the other things. Now, somehow they drilled a curved hole in the top of the stones. I have no idea how they did that. And if anyone figures out how to drill a curved hole through a stone, let me know. They did that so when they tied these stones off with rope, it wouldn't wear on a sharp corner cutting the rope. So they drilled these curved holes through stone. So the purpose of these stones, they were called Drogue Stones, and as they would be tied off to the sides of the ship, and as the ship went through waves, these stones would keep the ark pointed onto or into oncoming waves. This is, anyone that's ever been in a boat, for a day knows that when waves are coming at you, you go straight into them. If you're sideways, that's how you're capsized, that's how the ship is rolled. So you go straight into the waves. Keep in mind, the ark didn't have a sail. It didn't have a rudder. There was no way to steer it. It just floated. So these Drogue Stones guaranteed that whichever way the waves were coming in, the ark would be facing it and it would not flip over or capsize. Okay, on the day, that's the picture I wanted to show you of how it would point you into the waves with the Drogue Stones. So that's that. Okay, on the day the site was declared a national park, Mr. Wyatt was demonstrating surface radar scanning techniques to the governor of the district, Mr. Sevket, and that might be pronounced improperly, it's a Turkish name. As Ron explained the radar printout, he noticed a solid object was indicated near the surface. The governor ordered it dug up. With Turkish radio and television filming, a piece of fossilized, hand-hewn wood about 45 centimeters long was recovered. It appeared to be a piece of deck planking. To confirm this, the governor requested Ron Wyatt to arrange for laboratory analysis in the United States. Testing was carried out by Galbraith Labs in Knoxville, Tennessee, and the results showed the sample contained over 7% organic carbon consistent with fossilized wood. The specimen was clearly once living matter. Later, thin sections were cut from the sample for microscopic examination. To everyone's surprise, the wood consisted of 3 layers. It was laminated wood. Never before has petrified wood been found that was laminated. This revealed that the construction methods used by Noah in building the ark included laminating. This type of wood composition might have been the gopher wood that is spoken of in Genesis chapter 6. Here's a picture of Ron Wyatt on CNN, also on ABC's 2020, talking about the ark with his piece of gopher wood. Okay, that is all the information I have on where the ark might be located. If anyone else knows of a good story about where the ark is or has some great pictures, please let me know or pass them on to me. I'd be happy to add them to the presentation. Okay, we're going to look at evidence from history and geology, then we'll quickly look at anthropology, and we'll be done. And quickly that's a pretty relative term right now. Okay, so evidence from history. Here we go. There are over 270 flood stories. These stories transcend culture, language, and countries and times all around the world. In Hawaii, long after the death of Kunihana, the first man, the world became a wicked, terrible place to live. There was one good man left. His name was Nu'u. He made a great canoe with a house on it and filled it with animals. The waters came up over all the earth and killed all the people. Only Nu'u and his family were saved. This is, let's see, one ancient Chinese classic called The He King tells the story of Fu Hai, whom the Chinese consider to be the father of their civilization. This history records that Fu Hai, his wife, 3 sons, 3 daughters escaped a great flood. He and his family were the only people on the earth. After the great flood, they repopulated the world. Now this is just neat. This character right here is a Chinese character, and it's actually made up of 3 separate words. It's made up of 3 characters. This one here means 8. This one means person, and this third one means vessel. So those 3 characters together, an 8-person vessel, that's the Chinese word for boat. Now I just think that's neat. Noah, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives, and Noah's wife is 8 people. An 8-person vessel means boat. Okay, I don't know what that means, but it sure preaches well. Okay, the Toltec Indians of ancient Mexico said the first world lasted 1,716 years and was destroyed by a great flood that covered the highest mountains. Only one family named Cox survived. The Bible puts the flood at 1,656 years after the creation. The Toltec legend is only 60 years off after 4,000 years. And that's not even accurate, because remember, when the Bible said Adam lived to be 130 years and had a son named Seth. Okay, so we know Adam was 130. My question is, did he just turn 130, or was he just about to turn 131? Because that's a variance of 11 months. So understand, when the Bible gives dates, it oftentimes gives exact dates, but when it's giving a genealogy, it always gives a date within 11 months. So when you run down through all the genealogies, you find out that, well, there's actually a little bit of play, which is why I don't say that Jesus was born 2,000 years ago or that Abraham was born this much. It was about that time. Okay, so the Bible gives us very close approximations, but for whatever reason, God does not specifically give us to the date times. Understand? Make sense? I don't know if that helps. Okay, just thought of it while we were going through that. Okay, let's see, next slide. There it is. The Atlantis story may even be a flood legend. To Noah, the entire beautiful world sank beneath the waves. Now, all the stories are not identical about flood legends throughout the world in these different times and cultures and countries, but 95% of them all had a worldwide flood. 88% have one favored family, 82% had birds sent out from off the boat, 75% of them have the survivors performing sacrifices, and 73% of them had the survivors land on a mountain. So there are many similarities that transcend these stories, even though they are not identical. Okay, let's take a look at evidence from geology. Here is the Grand Canyon. I've stood there. It is a big hole in the dirt. Anyone else ever been there? Okay. We spent about an hour there. I thought that was about 45 minutes too long. I don't know if that's disrespectful, but I went out there and I looked and I said, wow, that looks nice. And I took a picture or two and I said, can we go get lunch? I don't know. I mean, maybe you're supposed to, I don't know how long you're supposed to. I don't know what's customary. Yeah. Okay. Where were we? Does anyone know the name of that river that flows through the bottom of the Grand Canyon? Colorado River, same one that flows through our town. Now, every teacher and every textbook out there says that the Colorado River carved out the Grand Canyon over millions of years. How many have been taught that when they were in school? Yeah, all of us. Okay. This is not true, but don't expect anyone in the public school system to catch that mistake, and if they do catch it, don't expect them to correct it. So how did the Grand Canyon form? Okay, we're going to start off with a fact. Okay, the fact is the Grand Canyon exists. Y'all with me so far? No one argues that? Okay, good. That's called a fact. The interpretation of the creationist is that the Grand Canyon was formed by a lot of water over a short amount of time, right? Whole bunch of water, worldwide flood, short amount of time, carved that canyon through a catastrophe. The interpretation of the evolutionist is that the Grand Canyon was formed by a lot of time and a very little bit of water. Millions and millions of years, and the little Colorado River carved that canyon. But that is not true. And the problem is that the public school system erases the line between the fact and the interpretation. They teach that the Grand Canyon formed by a little bit of water over millions of years. They don't teach that as a theory. They say that's how it's done. See, they mesh together the facts and their interpretation. That's the problem. So here is a aerial view that shows you, paints the picture of the problem. You can see how that section in the middle is white. That is snow. That is called the Kaibab Uplift. The Kaibab Uplift is a large plateau that rises from 2,800 feet where the Colorado River enters the canyon, and the earth rises up to 8,500 feet at the top of that plateau. The river just runs through the low spot. Here is a cross-section of the canyon. There we go. So, you see the Colorado River could not have cut the Grand Canyon because it enters the canyon 5,700 feet below the top of the plateau. The river didn't flow uphill for millions of years and slowly carve it down to the level that it's at. Okay, the river starts at 2,800 feet. Here is what really happened. The Kaibab Uplift didn't always have the Grand Canyon. It formed a dam, and a large lake was behind it. If you built a dam across the front of the Grand Canyon entrance right now, this would happen today. The lake that would form would cover most of southeast Utah, not missing much there, right? All the way back to our valley here in Grand Junction. That would all be filled with water. The theory is called the Grand Lake. If you just put a dam at the Grand Canyon. Here is, I put a little red circle there. Here is the spot where the entrance of the Grand Canyon, where the Colorado River enters the canyon. You can see you put a dam there, it forms a giant lake. Now, here's the cross-section of the Grand Canyon as I showed you before. If the canyon did not exist, what would be behind the Kaibab Uplift? That would be a giant lake, right? When the dam breached, all that water came spilling out and carved the Grand Canyon. And this process I am describing, I believe, happened in probably a matter of a day or two. And we've seen this process happen in nature over and over and over again. But the canyon was not created slowly over millions of years. There was a giant lake behind a dam. Have you ever seen a dam get breached? What happens to the dam? How long does it take for the dam to be totally gone? Right? Seconds, minutes. I mean, it is gone. That's what happened with the Kaibab Uplift. Now, we've seen this happen in nature. And we can go back to 1983. This is the Glen Canyon Dam in Lake Powell. In 1983, there was a tremendous amount of melting snow that caused heavy flooding. They were concerned about the integrity of the dam, so they said, open the spillways full bore. The spillways are the tunnels that they moderate the amount of water that passes through into the rivers below. And they'd never done that before. They said, open them all the way. We cannot lose the dam. Okay, they didn't want the whole thing to break and Lake Powell to just go flying away. You understand? Okay, so what happened? Water tore through 3 feet of steel reinforced concrete due to the process of cavitation. That was nothing but water. It left a hole 32 by 40 by 150 feet in steel reinforced concrete. Nothing but water running through there. Okay, water is powerful. When water gets going, anyone ever see water cut steel, cut concrete? It is unbelievable what you can do with just water. Now, we've seen this happen in nature recently on a large scale. I'm going to tell you the story about it right now. In Mount St. Helens, it is an 8,000-foot tall mountain in the Cascade Range in Washington State. Now, it used to be a 9,600-foot tall mountain. Mount St. Helens, prior to 1980, was doing just fine. And then she developed a real bad habit. She started smoking. In March 27th of 1980, steam issued from the top of the volcano. In March, there were several ash eruptions, just spitting some ash out of the volcano. Everybody, every geologist around the world knew something big was coming, and they all raced down there, okay, to study it. Not all of them made it home. Between the middle of March and May of 1980, the northern slope of the volcano was swelling 3 to 5 feet a day. Okay, something was going to happen. The last 3 days, May 15th through the 17th, geologists were making measurements and noticed the north slope was swelling 50 feet a day. Okay? 50 feet. On May 18th of 1980, the north side of the mountain lost 1,300 feet of summit elevation, and half of a cubic mile of landslide material slid off the northern slope. A quarter of that material slid into Spirit Lake to the northeast, causing the lake to raise up 860 feet above its previous level. Okay, because it was surrounded by mountains on all the other sides, and this whole mountain fell into it, and lake rose 860 feet. Okay? 3/8 of a cubic mile of landslide material went down the west side of the Toutle River drainage basin and blocked that drainage area. The mountain essentially became uncorked, and the pressure inside blew out the north face. The blast was equal to 20 million tons of TNT blast energy. Inside that cloud, they said it is 550 degrees Fahrenheit, and they said it was moving at over 200 miles per hour. And these pictures were taken by a photographer that survived, but was racing down a logging road at 100 miles an hour in an old truck to try to make it. There are other photographers and scientists out there that did not. This was the most devastating volcanic eruption in the history of the United States. More people died during Mount St. Helens than any other volcanic eruption. Here is the aftermath. Nope, one more. There it is. Here is the aftermath. This is an aerial photo looking to the north. You can see how the whole north face of the mountain just blew out, and you can see Spirit Lake off to the top in the center of that picture. Here is satellite imagery showing you, boy, this thing is getting worse and worse. Here it is. Okay. Here is satellite imagery showing the ash cloud covering several states. The ash traveled hundreds of miles. Here is the former profile of Mount St. Helens. It was the most destructive and deadly volcanic eruption in the history of the United States. As we said before, Spirit Lake rose 860 feet above normal levels. Here are before and after pictures of what the mountain looked like and what Spirit Lake looked like. Hot mud covered giant blocks of ice that had been blown off the mountain. Because of this, there were several steam explosions. When ice is buried by 550-degree mud, the ice is going to boil off and turn into steam, and it expands to 1,600 times the volume of water. Okay, and that turns to steam, and kaboom, nothing is getting in its way, nothing's stopping it. Okay? So, the this is kind of a long story for this next little bit, but just to explain what happened and how this relates to the flood, let me tell you the story. The landslide of May 18th buried the river and the highway to Spirit Lake to an average depth of 100 feet. It also buried most other drainage in the 23 square miles of the upper Toutle Valley and plugged the valley's mouth. For 22 months, water had no established pathway to the lower waterway. So this lake just kept getting full and full and full and full. There was no way for the lake to drain into the river and get on down to the ocean. You understand? Because a mountain just moved over a little bit and blocked its way. So that was it. So all the rain, all the snow melt just kept adding to this lake, and it kept getting higher. Then on March 19th, 1982, almost 2 years later, an eruption melted a large snowpack that had accumulated in the crater over the winter. The waters mixed with loose material on the slopes of the mountain, creating an enormous mud flow. In 9 hours, while no eye watched, the mud flow carved an integrated system of drainages over much of the valley and reopened the way to the Pacific Ocean. The drainages included at least 3 canyons 100 feet deep. One was nicknamed the Little Grand Canyon of the Toutle because it was a 1/40th scale model of the Grand Canyon. Here is a picture of the canyon that formed in 9 hours. This canyon, this canyon was 1,000 feet across, and it was 140 feet deep. Now, there is a river running through the bottom of it. You know what's going to happen? 100 years from now, 5th grade teacher is going to take his class there. They're going to look at it. They're going to say, look, kids, this little river carved through solid rock over millions and millions of years to form this canyon. But that didn't happen. Up to 600 feet of dirt and debris was deposited in some areas by the mud flows. Some of the area has been eroded away, which allows us to see the detailed layering that formed here in only a matter of hours. So all those layers that you see on the sides of canyons, okay, they were deposited there in 1 day in this case here. Understand that all the layers that you see on the mountains and in the canyons all around the world, they could have been deposited there in one catastrophic event. It wasn't millions and millions of years of deposition slowly laying down layer after layer after layer. May 18th, 1980, when Mount St. Helens erupted, there were subsequent eruptions on June 12th of the same year. On June 12th, 1980, you see all the different layers that were formed. Okay, all this stuff was laid down in one catastrophic event after another, and there's layer after layer after layer. Do you know that if you were to take a big glass jar and fill it with sand and gravel and different rocks and different types of dirt, and you fill it with water and you just shake it up and you set it down, it will settle out into layers? It's called hydrologic sorting. Go home and do it with your kids. It works every time. It's not a mystery. These layers on Earth did not lay down over millions and billions of years. They happened during one catastrophe. You ever wonder how you see layers of a mountain that are standing straight up? They didn't lay down slowly. That was a catastrophe that did that. Okay. Let's see. This canyon, let's go back one. We'll try. Nope. There. Wait. Back up. Okay, forward. There it is. Okay, this canyon eroded through solid rock in 9 hours. And this little river did not form this canyon. The water's just flowing through the low spot. That's what water does. Everywhere. It doesn't mean it formed what it's flowing through. Okay, and this little canyon wasn't formed by this little river over millions of years either. It was the same process. The Kaibab Uplift was a solid piece of earth. There was a giant lake behind it. There was a tremendous amount of rain and snow one year, and the water level rose, and it breached the dam, and it started to tear through it, and boom, tore through and made the Grand Canyon, tore through solid rock in a period of a day or two. The exact same way that it happened up in Mount St. Helens with the Toutle River. Now, you don't have to believe that that's the way it happened, but you have to admit that it's possible because we've watched it. We've watched the process. What we've never watched is anything happen for millions of years. But no one asks anyone about that. We just take the medicine, shut up and swallow it. Okay, I totally lost where I am in my notes, so I figured I'll just make fun of the public school system. Okay, let's take a look at the effects of the worldwide flood. We'll start with the landscape and atmosphere. All right, this part's really neat, or at least I like it. Imagine the entire Earth covered with water for a calendar year. How much would that mess up the landscape? Right? Okay, here is the Earth and the moon, not drawn to scale. Here you see the high tides on the near side and the far side of the Earth in relation to the moon. That's how it works. As the moon goes around the Earth, the high tides move. You have high tides everywhere on the Earth twice a day. We all with me? Okay. As the moon goes around the Earth, the tides go around with it. But during the flood, there would be no hills or mountains stopping those tides. They would become harmonic and they would become massive. They would churn up the landscape and change everything on Earth. There would be no trees, grass, bushes, anything left when it was done. When Noah got off the boat, the Earth probably looked like the moon. It was barren. I often get asked this question, where'd all the water go? Well, the water we have today is the same amount of water there was on the Earth during the days of Noah. This is going to make someone mad, but do you know that there's no way you can waste water? Same amount of water that was on Earth when God created it is the same amount of water that we have on Earth today. Now, you might have to filter it or purify it or desalinize it, but there is no way for me to waste water. I can leave the faucet on at my house for the rest of my life. I ain't wasting it. Now, I'm paying for it. I might be wasting money, but it's not like the water disappears. Okay? The same amount of water that was on the Earth during the flood is the same amount now. Most of the water was under the surface of the Earth. Okay? And the Earth did not have mountains like it does today. There was no Mount Everest. There were mountains, but they weren't as big and gigantic as there were today. And after the flood, the Bible talks about, and we'll look at it in a little bit, the mountains were forming, and as the high spots formed, the water rushed off into the low spots. Today we call them oceans. That's where the water is. All right, let's see. The majority of the water was underneath the surface of the Earth, so the water didn't go anywhere. In Psalm 104, this describes this time in the Bible that I'm talking about, in verse 5 and 6. Who laid the foundation of the earth that it should not be moved, or that it should not be removed forever? Thou coverest it with the deep as with a garment. The water stood above the mountains. So the earth was covered with water. Okay, we're all on the same page. We're talking about the flood here. In the next verse, at thy rebuke they fled, at thy voice they thundered, they hasted away. So when the mountains formed, the waters ran off of them. As that was happening, that's what cut a lot of the streams and lakes and canyons and rivers that we have today. Next, we read in verse 8, they go up by the mountains, they go down by the valleys unto the place which thou hast founded for them. I believe this is talking about the mountains and the valleys that were forming during and after the flood. You got to remember, when the earth was underwater for an entire year, the earth was a lot more soft and malleable. I'm not saying all the way through, I'm just saying the surface. And as the mountains got pushed up, okay, valleys formed and the waters rushed off of the high places. This was going on during and after the flood. There was lots of volcanoes, there were earthquakes, okay, the earth was moving, things were shifting, and that's when I believe the majority of the mountains were being formed. In Genesis chapter 8, verse 1, we read, and God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark, and God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. The word assuaged is talking about when the soft parts of the earth settled down, pushing up the mountains, the water ran off of the face of the earth into the newly formed canyons and the seas and the oceans. Okay, we're going to get into the Ice Age in a bit, but I just want to hit this really quick. For now, let's just agree that there was one. At the time of the Ice Age, which was immediately following the flood, the continents used to be much larger. A great deal of the water, because the sea level was much lower, because a great deal of the water on Earth was tied up in the form of snow and glaciers. This caused the sea level to be much lower in the past. The water level was low enough around the world for you to walk anywhere on Earth without an ocean being in the way. During this time, when you read through the book of Genesis, chapter 10, you read through these genealogies, and it's just going over, this guy had a son named this, and this guy had a son named this, and this guy had a son named this. And then all of a sudden, in verse 25, it hits the strange one where it gives you extra information. It says, and unto Eber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. The name Peleg means division. He may have lived at the time of the dispersion from Babel. Remember, that happened right after the flood. He was he was born 99 years after the flood. That puts the timing right for Babylon and the Tower of Babel. So, two things happened during the days of Peleg. Number one, the languages and the nations were divided at the Tower of Babel. So there are all these different people groups with different languages. And what did they do? They all split up. People that spoke this language went there, the people that spoke that language went there, and they all split up. That was the goal. Then, after they had split up, the ice age came to an end. The water began to melt and rise the sea level. This divided the high spots on Earth into islands and continents, and all of a sudden, the Earth was divided. Those groups of people became isolated along with animals. And then those groups of people started to continue to marry and have kids, and their dominant traits started to take over on different parts of the earth. And that's how you get all the different ethnic groups on earth. Okay, so it was during the time of Peleg, after the after the flood, in the days of Peleg, when all the continents were formed because the ice age ended, the waters rose, and the people were stuck in their different spots geographically. And I believe that was the division it's talking about here. Okay, now, this is a topographical map with the water removed. Here you can see England, Scotland, Ireland, and you can see France. Now, if the ocean levels were 150 feet lower, you could walk from England to France. There would be no English Channel if you drop the water levels 150 feet. Alaska and Russia were connected. All the continents were connected for the first few hundred years after the flood. Populations spread out across the globe and became trapped on their continents by the rising sea levels that happened shortly after the Ice Age. As you can see here, you could walk from Southeast Asia to Australia. Now, do you know that we have proof that the sea levels were lower in the past? Here we see Here we find proof of this theory. Ancient Egyptian cities discovered under 30 feet of water in the Mediterranean Sea. Do you think they built the cities underwater? No. The sea level was lower. They wanted to live out by the shore, and when the sea level was lower, they built a city, and then when the ice age was tapering off and it was getting warmer and warmer and the sea levels rose, well, they had to abandon the city and come inland because the water levels rose. As the sea levels rose, the Mediterranean would have been filled in along with the Black Sea. In the summer of the year 2000, ancient cities were discovered under 150 feet of water in the Black Sea. The sea levels were lower in the past. That happened immediately after the flood. 100 years after the flood was the time of Peleg. That was the time of the Tower of Babel. The people split up. They went all over the world, and they wanted to live with, oceanfront views just like the rest of us. So they built a nice town or a city because they wanted it to be a port city because those are going to be the most affluent cities for trade and commerce. And then what happened? As the ice age tapered off, things warmed up, the sea levels rose, and you have a city 150 feet underwater. So, I'm going to go back one. Here we are. So what type, I know I went through that quickly. Did that all make sense? Did we follow that? Okay. So what type of devastation was happening during the flood and immediately following the flood? Okay, to give you an example of this, we are going to look at a story of an island named Krakatoa. Krakatoa was a volcano that exploded on August 27, 1883. More than 36,000 people died, none of which lived on the island because the island was uninhabited. The nearest inhabited islands were a couple hundred miles away. The blast waves cracked walls and broke windows up to 160 kilometers away. The vibrations smashed shop windows 80 miles away. The ships in the sea near Krakatoa reported that floating pumice formed a layer about 3 meters thick. Other ships 160 miles off said their decks were covered with volcanic dust days after the explosion. The climactic temperatures in New England changed, even though it was 3,000 miles away because of the dust particles that got up into the sky. Tidal waves wiped out more than 150 villages. Vibrations were felt in France and England, thousands of miles away, and debris landed in Australia, all from this one volcano. Due to the ash, darkness covered the Sunda Straits from 11 a.m. on the 27th until dawn the next day. Krakatoa is right there in that red circle. You can see Australia is the main body of land in the lower right-hand corner of the picture. 3 months after the eruption, these products had spread to higher latitudes, causing such vivid red sunset afterglows that fire engines were called out in New York, Poughkeepsie, and New Haven to quench the apparent forest fires. Unusual sunsets continued for 3 years. Rafts of floating pumice, locally thick enough to support men, trees, and no doubt other biological passengers, crossed the Indian Ocean in 10 months. Others reached Melanesia and were still afloat 2 years after the eruption. The volcanic dust veil that created such spectacular atmospheric effects also acted as a solar radiation filter, lowering global temperatures as much as 1.2 degrees in the year after the eruption. Temperatures did not return to normal until 1888, 5 years later. That was one volcano. Imagine during the time of the flood how many volcanoes were going off after the world was getting churned up by all that water. And afterward, the amount of earthquakes and the amount of volcanoes that were going off. Mountains were forming. To put this in perspective, Mount St. Helens ejected 1 cubic kilometer of debris into the atmosphere. Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD ejected 3 cubic kilometers. Krakatoa in 1883 ejected 18 cubic kilometers. And Tambora in 1815, only 900 miles away from Krakatoa, ejected 80 cubic kilometers into the atmosphere. Now, what would happen if a dozen of these were erupting all at the same time? I think there would be enough debris in the air to partially block out the sun and drop the global temperatures by 10 or 20 degrees. We would then enter an ice age. And that's where the ice age fits into the Bible, immediately following the flood. But this ice age had other profound effects. We know there was an ice age. Evidence of glaciers are everywhere. A good portion of North America was covered in snow and ice. So what caused the ice age? Number 1, volcanic activity during and after the flood. Number 2 was warm oceans after the flood. The average temperature of the oceans today is about 39 degrees. Towards the end of the flood, the average temperature could have been as warm as 86 degrees. This is due to all the water coming up from under the surface of the earth and also the large amount of volcanic activity. Now, the volcanic activity would have blocked out the sun to some degree. Global temperatures would have lowered. All the warm air off the oceans, hitting the cold land temperatures, mixed with all the carrier particles from the volcanic ash and soot, would create a lot of snow. Evaporation off of the oceans would have been greatly increased because warm water evaporates more quickly than cold water. Snowfall increasing and less springtime snowmelt would create an ice age in a matter of a couple years. And that happened immediately after the flood. Okay, now, I am going to skip the woolly mammoths. I'm just doing it, okay? Going to skip this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and we're going to get to it, but we're not going to do it today. Even though it's pretty neat, we just don't have the time. And if this remote mouse worked, so I pushed the button 5 times, and again, there it is. For every one slide I get, I'm sorry, I'm going to blame this mouse, not my, undisciplined amount of my time discipline. Okay, let's see. Let's look at, because this is what we all want to get to. Let's look at the effects of the flood on biology and anthropology, and we'll be done. You ready? Home stretch. You hanging in there? Okay, this is the current theory of evolution right here, portrayed in one picture. It is a popular picture, and it is intended to indoctrinate children. And this is what it means. You came from monkeys, God is not real. That's what that picture means, okay? Now, they will tell us that we have found bones in the dirt. That proves that we came from monkeys. And it's true, we have found bones in the dirt. And some bones look to be half human. And we have found primitive tools from the times that people lived in caves. Keep in mind, people still live in caves today. Doesn't mean they're any less human. Here are some of the more popular cavemen they have taught me growing up in public schools. Even though they have been proven wrong for over 60 years, these examples are still in textbooks today. Who here remembers hearing about Nebraska Man? Anyone? Got a bunch of hands there. Okay. Nebraska Man was made up from one tooth. Do you know that? That's all they found. They found one tooth, and they called them Nebraska Man. The London News drew a picture of Nebraska Man and his wife, even though they only found one tooth. Why do we call that news? That is pushing an agenda, not reporting the facts. Nebraska Man was later found out to be the tooth of a pig. Here is the New York Times, whose motto should be, shockingly, still in business. They had this headline in 1912. Darwin's theory is proved true. They reported on Piltdown Man. Anyone remember learning about Piltdown Man? Got a couple more. Okay. In 1912, an amateur archaeologist who wanted to supply evidence on Darwin's theory of evolution claimed that he had discovered a human-like skull in the gravel pit in Piltdown, England. He had filed down the teeth to make them look more human, stained the bones to make them look old and genuine, and the lie was believed for almost 50 years. Turned out that it was the lower jawbone of a female orangutan. Do you know how many people wrote their doctoral theses on this and have a PhD today because of this lie that lasted for 50 years? Here is Australopithecus Afarensis, also known as Lucy. These are the bones found by Donald Johansen, discovered in 1974 in Ethiopia. Johansen had gone to Africa on a grant to find a missing link. 2 weeks before his grant money ran out, he found Lucy. Miraculous, I know. This is not really Lucy's knee. It is the Hadar knee, found a year earlier, 70 meters lower and over a mile away. National Geographic called it Lucy's knee 5 times in the November 1985 issue. Some of the bones from Lucy were found over 200 feet deeper in the ground and over a mile away. My question would be, what did the train look like that hit that animal? How do you spread bones a mile away and 200 feet deeper in the ground and call it the same animal? That is not intellectual honesty. The St. Louis Zoo has Lucy displayed with human feet and hands. Not one foot or hand bone was found during the discovery of Lucy. The statue is a complete misrepresentation, and I believe they know it is one. Zoo officials have no plans to knuckle under. We cannot be updating every exhibit based on every new piece of evidence. We look at the overall exhibit and the impression it creates. We think the overall impression this exhibit creates is correct. That was from the zoo's director of education. So just so we're clear, do not think that the scientific community is objective. They are constantly influenced by personal feelings, tastes, and opinions. He said that the overall impression it creates is what they're looking for, which is that Lucy became human. They don't have a disclaimer that no hand or foot bones were found with this animal. Okay, then we have Neanderthal Man. The first one was found in 1856 and classified as 100% human. More than 300 Neanderthals have been found since. That's actually a dated comment. It's been many more. They have a 13% bigger brain than modern man. Males are the average height of 5'9", females are 5'3". So the question is, why are they classified as different than human? Here is something that they do a lot of. They take a skull, and any skull that looks a little bit different, they get an anatomical reconstruction, which is not scientific. They will hire someone to tell, they will hire someone to tell them what the person looked like. Here are two different likenesses from two different artists from the same skull. A lot of this has to do with the belief system of the artist. The one on the top clearly looks more human. The one on the bottom clearly looks more like a missing link, and it's from the same skull. They do this stuff all the time, and it's really terrible. Here in the book, what's the name of it? Buried Alive, we read, after examining the famous Rhodesia Man Neanderthal skull, Dr. Cuazzo said, "You must understand that this skull really cries out disease. The teeth are badly decayed and the bones of the vault of the skull are extremely thick. There are many features that testify of acromegaly or excess secretion of growth hormone in adulthood. Do you know that the brow ridge never stops growing, along with your nose and your ears?" Go ahead and check out a real old person. They have bigger ears and a bigger nose. They continue to grow by just a small amount, but they never stop growing, including the brow ridge on every human. Now, this looks more like a human that was 200 years old. The average age before the flood was 912 years. For the first 100 years after the flood, everyone that was born lived to be 400 years old. And then you find some of their skeletons in the ground, and they look a little bit different, and they say, aha, missing link. It's not a missing link. And here we find modern man, and he has furniture's disease. His chest fell down into his drawers. Romans 1:22, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. This guy digs up in the dirt in his backyard like a dog and finds a bone and says, here it is, my ancestor, a monkey. Back in the mid-1800s, the British Navy had an epidemic of scurvy. That is a vitamin C deficiency. To correct the problem, they brought aboard and fed to their sailors limes, which is why a sailor is sometimes called a limey. The skeleton of a severe scurvy victim. That skeleton is 100% human. 1 million sailors died of scurvy in the British Navy. Now, if the bones from this skeleton were dug up today, a paleontologist would cry out missing link. But we know these are the bones caused by disease, not millions of years of evolution. Remember that the volcanic ash blocking out the sun and the large amounts of snow would have made a balanced diet difficult immediately following the flood. The lack of sunlight would almost certainly cause a vitamin D deficiency worldwide. You get the majority of your vitamin D from sunlight. This could bring on an epidemic of rickets. This was the case immediately following the flood. People were living to be hundreds of years old, and their skulls and their bones were slightly deformed and misshapen. They had a horrible diet because there were no crops to immediately eat. There was no sunshine to get your vitamin D. So because of that, again, their skull and their bones would have been slightly deformed at best. And when we find the remains of some of these people, they cry out, missing link, rather than recognizing what it was, which was a disease from a deficiency. And guess what? That's it. We're done. Yeah. Okay. Now, this picture is popular in a nursery or a daycare, but it is so far from accurate. I prefer this picture. It is called The Deluge by Francis Danby, and it shows man and beast fighting and clawing their way to higher ground as the waters rise up around them. You can see the ark floating away in the distance in the moonlight. And you can imagine the people cursing Noah and God as they realize their fate. God promised he would never again destroy the world by a flood, but he also promised to judge the world one more time, and it won't be by water, it'll be by fire. And as I end, every time I get up and teach the Bible, I'll end this one the same way, and that is with a question. If you were to die today, are you 100% sure without any doubt that you would go to heaven when you die? There is no right or wrong answer. There is only an honest one. And if there's anyone under the sound of my voice that is not sure, I would ask you, do not wait. You do not know when your last day is. Let me take the Bible and show you how you can know for sure that you are saved, your sins are forgiven, and heaven is your home. And for those of you that might not know me, my name is Patrick Hayes. I ask that you look us up and follow us on Facebook. You can find us at facebook.com/Bible Study on the Farm, and you can also get in touch with me by email at BibleStudyOnTheFarm@gmail.com. If you ever have a question about the Bible, I'd love to be a help in any way. And with that, let's have a word of prayer, and I'll let you guys go. God, thank you